And we have access to opportunity, the connection between jobs and transit in Tampa Bay. I'm looking very forward to it. Mr. Dave Sobush, Director of Policy of Research, Tampa Bay Partnership, is with us today to do an overview. And Mr. Sobush, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good morning, directors. Dave Sobush, Director of Policy and Research for the Tampa Bay Partnership, excited to share with you the results of a multi-year research project that we've undertaken to understand how planned transit investments in the Tampa Bay region can affect job access. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just as a little bit of background, the origin and maybe inspiration for this work was a 2011 report that the Brookings Institution did called Missed Opportunity, Transit and Jobs in Metropolitan America. And that study found that Tampa Bay ranked 93rd out of the top 100 markets in terms of the share of jobs within the metro accessible within a 90-minute transit commute. As the partnership, as part of our public policy and interest in transit, tried to understand, why is it we're doing what we're doing with regards to transit? We always said it was about access to jobs, and somebody had the bright idea to say, well, can we quantify that? And so all eyes looked at me, and so I called Adi Tomer, who was the lead researcher at Brookings, who did the 2011 report, explained to him what we were trying to do. And the first piece of advice he gave me was, don't do it. It's too much work, but if you do, call the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory. And we'll get to that in just a moment. One of the key things that we did with this research is that we modeled system-wide investments in transit as opposed to specific lines or specific projects. And I'll explain those scenarios as we get into the presentation. And rather than look at a 90-minute transit commute, which we thought was a little lengthy, we changed our scope of analysis to a 60-minute commute. So in many ways, while our work is born out of the work done by Brookings in 2011, in many ways we can't make direct comparisons simply because we've sort of changed the rules of engagement in there. One of the important things to know here is we didn't, at the partnership or the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory, did not invent transit projects. We went directly to the agency. So our consultant, Tyndale Oliver, who works on many of the transit development plans here locally, worked with staff at HART, PSTA, Pasco County Public Transit, I believe even the folks that run the Bull Runner, to understand what is in your 10-year transit development plans. And so Tyndale Oliver took those plans, converted them into code that the University of Minnesota's computer systems could read, the GTFS code, and ran the analyses using a data set from the Census Bureau that talks about the origin and destination of residents and their jobs. And as we go through these scenarios and the numbers, I want you to note that the figures you see are all additive, so they are building upon the previous scenario. And so with that, let's talk about the scenarios we modeled. Next slide, please. So scenario A is improved local bus service, and that translates into the 10-year transit development plan needs elements. So it's what is in the HART TDP, the PSTA TDP, et cetera. Scenario B adds on to that, adds on some local premium projects, most notably the Sunrunner, which is the downtown St. Pete to the Beach BRT system under construction, the TICO streetcar modernization and extension, as well as the Florida Avenue BRT. Scenario C adds in a regional premium transit project in the regional rapid transit, the 41-mile Wesley Chapel to downtown St. Petersburg, connecting the key employment and activity centers in the region. And then scenario D is the whole kit and caboodle, and it's really that TBARTA Envision 2030 regional TDP, not the needs element, but the vision element. So it is littered with multiple BRTs, it's ferry service, it's passenger service on CSX rail lines, and you'll see the results from that as we dive in. Next slide, please. So the first scenario is the 10-year TDP, the local bus improvements. And the map that's on the left-hand side of each of these slides, the dark green shows percentage increases in job access of 100% or more. And it goes down to the very lightest green is between 0 and 10%. One thing to note here is you get a certain numerator and denominator effect here. And while you'll see initially, at least for example, the urban core of Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, it is not very dark green. That is because even with our relatively meager transit service relative to other regions, the city of Tampa in the urban core does have the best transit service within the region. And while they do not have a tremendous percentage increase, they have a large numeric increase, and we'll get into some of that as we go. But across the entire metro area, which is actually Hernando, Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, we see that these TDP needs elements get the average worker an additional 26,000 jobs, which is a 29% increase across the board, and changes from 7.2% of all jobs in the metro accessible within 60 minutes to 9.2. And that may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. And that's out of the base of 1.2 million jobs in the MSA. And you see there the relative statistics for both the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County. Again, the percentage increase, city of Tampa 19.4 below the regional figure, but that numeric change of 42,700 additional jobs, and the share of all jobs accessible, more than a fifth of all jobs in the entire 4-county metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute for city of Tampa residents. Going into scenario B, you see that the map on the left didn't change that much, and that's not a typo. Really, these premium transit projects do not, in and of themselves, contribute a significant amount to job access. It moves the needle from...
I don't think we have a different map.
Next slide. I had one job to do, 2 jobs, give the presentation. Second job was to...
It's hard to think about both things.
I'm lucky if I can walk and breathe at the same time sometimes. So, thank you. Scenario B, the map didn't change that much. And we get a meager increase by adding in the Sunrunner, the Tico streetcar, and the Florida Avenue BRT. And those, that does not say those are not good projects, but they don't move the needle a lot in terms of job access. And the rest of the statistics are pretty close to what we saw in scenario A. Scenario C, when we add in the regional rapid transit, again, a improved statistics related to job access, but not as big of a jump as we saw just by putting the local bus needs elements in the system. We move from 30 point something to 35.2, so a little bit of a larger job access increase going from B to C than rather from A to B. And we get to just under 10% of all jobs in the metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute. And again, you see the common phenomenon of the numeric change in Tampa and Hillsborough County being larger than that of the region, but the percentage change being somewhat less. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so here's the whole kit and caboodle. This is everything that we've seen before, but it's adding in the ferry, it's adding in passenger service on the CSX tracks, it's adding in multiple BRTs, additional limited express service, and we get to a 52,000 plus increase in jobs accessible to the typical MSA worker, and that's just under 60%, 57.9 job access increase. And we've moved from 7.2% of jobs accessible within the region to 11.3. And we note here that under the Envision 2030 scenario that 116,000 workers out of those 1.2 million, so just around 10% of the workers are able to access 150,000 more jobs. And again, the statistics for Tampa and Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. One of the good things about this analysis that was done for us by the University of Minnesota is they gave us really granular data, and we can use that data to model all sorts of different geographies. And one of the things we took a look at earlier on in 2020 was the areas that had a large share of unemployment or claims for reemployment assistance due to the COVID pandemic. And so these areas that are shaded here represent zip codes where 5% or more of the workforce filed in the early months of the pandemic an initial claim for reemployment assistance or unemployment benefits. And, we note here that just around 30% of all zip codes in the metro met that criteria. There's 414,000 workers that were in those areas. And while we saw 56,000 job increase under in the scenario D, these workers would have access to 76,000 additional jobs. And so again, when we're thinking about ways that a community can prepare itself to be resilient in the face of pandemic response or other disaster, the connecting people to employment opportunities is an important part of that. And then finally, we took a look from an equity lens, taking a look at areas of high poverty and limited vehicle access. So the shaded areas on this map show block groups, which is a unit of census geography, where the poverty rate is above 20%, or rather, where greater than 20% of households had no vehicle, or greater than 75% of households only had one vehicle. And again, right around 30%, 28.9% of the geography in the metro met those criteria. And we see a 74,000 job increase under scenario D for residents of these areas. And, finally, this shows all of the scenarios and the relevant statistics in terms of job access change numerically as well as percentage-wise, and the share of jobs within the metro accessible within a 60-minute transit commute. And you see that additive function, and you see kind of that, big jump going from the baseline just by adding local bus, and then minor steps up when you add the regional premium transit and the local premium transit. And then, of course, under a very ambitious Envision 2030 plan, another big jump up in terms of, both numeric percentage and the share of jobs accessible to the typical MSA worker. Here's just, a breakdown of the geographies that were analyzed. You see that the numeric changes are largest in our urban centers and smallest in our more less densely populated communities. And on the flip side, the percentage changes, I'm sorry, you're doing a great job keeping up with me. The percentage changes, it's sort of the reverse of that, where our less densely populated areas have a larger percentage change. Next slide. So, finally, one of the things that we do each year at the partnership in collaboration with United Way Suncoast and Community Foundation at Tampa Bay is our regional competitiveness report. And as you know, when we look at that, both ridership and transit vehicle supply in terms of vehicle revenue miles, we've ranked 20th out of the 20 markets we study. When we took a look at job access, the University of Minnesota, they do these rankings already. And currently we are 15th out of the 20 markets in the regional competitiveness report, which means that despite sort of the limited availability and the limited access, our transit agencies in the region are doing a better job, whether it's intentional or not, of connecting people to jobs within the region. And if we were to move from the baseline to that Envision 2030, that scenario D, the good news is we'd move up, but we still wouldn't be at the top, and that's with billions and billions of dollars of transit investment, which gives you an idea of sort of the deficit from which we're operating at present. So I thank you for your time. Just some key takeaways before we go. One is that job access is and should be an additional goal to have for transit planning. I heard one time if transit is the answer to our question, what is that question? What problem is it we're trying to solve? And so use that as for goal setting and for analysis for transit planning. Another one is that it's the local bus service. That's the workhorse. The premium transit is a nice show horse, but it's the local transit that gets people where they need to be. This analysis done by University of Minnesota found that the regional rapid transit had a larger impact on job access versus the premium projects that serve a single county. And that Envision 2030 scenario certainly is ambitious and has a very large increase in terms of the share of jobs accessible change as well as the numeric change. and that we would move from 15th to 9th among our 20 markets. When you expand that to all of the markets that the University of Minnesota takes a look at, the top 49 markets that they do, Tampa Bay jumps from 41st to 27th. So just a little bit of additional context there. So now I thank you and gladly stand, Madam Chair, for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. And I see Commissioner Overman, you have your hand raised. You're recognized.
Thank you. And Commissioner Kemp, your audio is a little muffled, so I'm not sure if that's just my system or everybody else, but I've noticed it's a little bit difficult to hear you. Dave, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I noticed there wasn't a link in the agenda to the actual slides, and there's great data here. And I think the reason I want to really dive into it a little more is twofold. One, I think it's critically important that we look at equity in our policy. I know the county is working on rolling out our equity profile pretty quickly, but it looks as though in your summary, if I heard you correctly, that scenario D would have the greatest impact on those individuals that are transit dependent in connecting people to jobs. And that plays into two goals of mine, which is, where do I need to focus not only my efforts to be here and to promote transit, but how does that connect to where people live and how they afford to live? Because transit's a component of a family's financial picture, and whether they need a second car or whether or not they can live with transit, or if they don't have a car, can they get to work? So I think it's critical that we look at which scenario we focus, and then based on that, worked with the current TOD study that's happening, but also in developing a TOD strategy along with the counties, our local county, but also regional county, to see how we can best prepare for success in the people that work here. And that's why I really enjoyed seeing the numbers that you did and the various different outcomes, because if scenario D creates the greatest access to jobs based on what those routes look like, then that would signal to me in my efforts of marrying transit and affordable housing, where our focus should be. And so I'm looking forward to getting copies of the slide if possible, because I looked on your website, I didn't find it, but and like I said, I didn't see the link in the agenda to be able to look at it at length. But thank you so much for pointing out the comparisons, because I think it's important when we're looking at how HART grows and how we move forward and how we deploy resources towards enhanced transit. It'll make a big difference in making sure that we're getting the best ROI for our citizens, but also, in terms of the return on investment for the routes that are developed as a consequence of our strategic planning. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Overman. I'd point out that, scenario D is additive to the other scenarios. And so you got to go from walking in scenario A to running in scenarios B and C to sprinting like Usain Bolt in scenario D. So with that little bit of, context, certainly point well taken, and I believe staff will be making the presentation available following today's presentation.
Thank you for that clarification. Director Hudson.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to you and Rick and the partnership. You guys have been really laser focused on, job accessibility, which I think is one of the ways that people most frequently experience firsthand, the shortcomings of our transit system. It's not abstract, it's very real. And one question I had is whether any of these studies have looked at land use and zoning at all to sort of shape the direction, shape the trajectory of where new businesses are going. So I pulled up the old study, and some of the top metros for accessibility on transit were Honolulu, Madison, Wisconsin, Tucson, places that I wouldn't intuitively think would beat us so badly. Is that kind of off topic for what you guys are focused on, or do you know if there's any research on that?
It's certainly not off topic, and it's a complex system.
Sure.
there's two ways to improve job accessibility. One is, there's, at least two ways to improve it. One is to get transit from where people are living to where they're working. Another is to, shorten the distance, between those places. So certainly land use is a way to improve job access. And, I don't know if the University of Minnesota does this, but I imagine there's probably some sort of research institute out there that can just pick up jobs from one place and say, if you move them here, you would see better accessibility via transit. The way Minnesota does it is they take a look at, changes in the transit network and how that affects, job access for residents.
Director McLean.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Dave, great presentation. As with all these studies the partnership has done, it always does highlight very good areas of improvement and also where we stand in terms of a national standpoint. And thanks for the explanation. We have to kind of crawl, walk, run through the scenarios, whether it's A, B, C, and D, of course. It was interesting that you pointed out that scenario C, in all honesty, would probably have the largest effect on our community and enhancing transit for our constituents. So that's interesting. I did want to ask you a question. It gets back to the gist of why we're at where we're at right now. As you know, we've had a kind of a large focus on transit over the last 5 years that I've been involved in it. And we've seen Tampa and the region grow substantially. In your mind, Dave, and I guess using some of the studies you've dealt with, is there a real direct cause, and it might be a rhetorical question if I said, hey, is the cause that we're in the shape we're in right now, is it financially? And like I said, it might be rhetorical, but just wanted to get your opinion on why we're at where we're at. And then, again, just to thank you for the briefing, very enlightening. And as Commissioner Omerman stated, I would like to see those slides too, because there's a lot of great information there. So.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you, Director McLean. I think you answered the question. It's financial, and it's why additional funds to put these plans, get them off the shelf and get shovels into the ground is so important. It's why many in this room, the partnership included, have been supportive of those referendum efforts for many, many years, most recently in 2018, and just got to keep swinging the axe, to get that where we need it to be. Thank you.
And with that, I don't see anyone else, but I would just like to say, as I'm sure you expect, maybe, and for me, this is a watershed in the way that we are looking at transit in the region. I've always thought by strengthening the parts is what you do to strengthen the region, and I don't think people have understood how critically low our investment is in transit. And as you've stated, which I thought was interesting, and in some ways not surprising to me, that we're serving our critical needs better than other places, maybe because we're so distressed and so limited, that we recognize that in some way. I think that what you've put out here has flipped, totally reversed the regional conversation with the focus on interstate regional rapid transit single route. And I've always thought by strengthening the parts, and I saw some additional information which I'd like to layer into this at some point, about that I had asked actually for the TBARDA on this regional transit to look at, and that's how it's serving Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. And I thought it was really definitive because only 5% of the users, and that's projected hypothetical, would use it to cross county lines, whereas 100% in Pasco would. It's obviously more some issues in those, and no one they didn't even have a projected individual that would ever take the transit. And I just think it's so obvious from Wesley Chapel to St. Petersburg. Only though, very few people would ever take it from Wesley Chapel to the airport or West Shore. So it's the routes we already have that we need to strengthen within the region, but also our local routes. It is the local bus that is the workhorse, and that's what all this has shown, and all those other things only very incrementally. Scenario A is a scenario for us to do all our focus on, just what you're saying. And the other things only bring us de minimis returns for investment and efficiency, and may not even be there. But I also would like in the future, I think it's good to see, and you probably have generated this a little bit about the scenarios, if you were to add in, after you do A, if you add in, for instance, CSX, and then we have terms and costs and efficiencies, and that, that I'm really curious to see even more generated stats. I also, on the ferries, a strange kind of thing. I'm not sure if you did the connection between South County and McDill as a job connection, but then it's also got the Tampa to St. Pete, which is no kind of commuter connection, but a connection that happens for people just enjoying those places, or visits or trips, or something to that. It doesn't work as a commuter route. But this is, to me, extremely interesting. I think it sets another tone for where we move, and the scenario A being the strength and base of every transit system. Your local bus is where you have your most efficiencies, most service, most usefulness, most access to jobs and opportunities. And we're, if anything, less different than other people in that regard, and more that way because of our geography separated by bridges from Pinellas in one case, which are a daunting barrier without stops. So in that way, for transit service. But this is, to me, extremely interesting. That focus on arterial roads is where I've been trying to get us, on arterial road and local bus, and scenario A. So thank you. I think this is really different than the conversation we've been having.
Well, you're welcome, and that's why we do this work, is to incite conversation. I might take a slightly different look at it and say that what this study shows is that if you use job access as your target, you get some certain results. Certainly, if you want, if affordable housing or land use is your goal, and that's why you're implementing transit, it's going to require different types of connections. And certainly, and I think it's with respect to the regional rapid transit, because it is, along corridors that are already served by transit, you don't see as much of a jump there. But for that 100% of Pasco that's coming into Hillsborough, those are workers for Hillsborough businesses. Those are customers for Hillsborough businesses. And so I think it's important, and we would continue to say the more we can connect this region and perform as a market of 3.9 million people, and the better off we'd be, and the more we'll see our rankings improve across the board.
And I wouldn't contest any of that. It's just the 100% that's leaving, and they only judged on that one route on their information.